Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Supply and Demand. This is part one, the introduction. This is the fundamental model in economics, so make sure to pay attention. Very important. All right, so our learning goals for supply and demand. First of all, we want to learn the key concepts of these things. We want to apply those key concepts. We also want to explore real-world problems, one of which, for example, is minimum wage. We also want to try to develop possible solutions to these real-world problems. So as we learn the model, we're going to be exploring these real-world issues that we have in our society. So, important question. Why does the supply and demand model only apply to competitive markets? Because it does. It only applies to competitive markets. Why is that? Well, because in competitive markets, sellers and buyers voluntarily choose to exchange, voluntarily choose to engage in economic transactions. Without voluntary exchange, competition is impossible. So supply is, of course, represents the sellers, and demand represents the buyers. And because these people have to choose to engage in economic transactions, that market is competitive. And this is why supply and demand only applies in competitive markets. So, of course, what kind of market do we have in the U.S.? We have a competitive market. All right, so what are the characteristics of a competitive market? Well, first of all, you have several, count them, lots, okay? Not one, not two, not a few, several, lots, multiple buyers and sellers of the same good or service. There are 5 key elements to the supply and demand model. You have the demand curve, the supply curve, the set of factors that causes the demand curve to shift, and the set of factors that causes the supply curve to shift. We'll explore those 2 things in later lessons. The equilibrium price, and the way the equilibrium price changes when the supply and demand curves shift. You're like, what? Yes, I know, that doesn't make any sense, but don't worry, I promise it will make perfect sense as we go forward. So here you see a drawing of the supply and demand model. So when I tell you, draw the supply and demand model, this is exactly what I want, okay? Now the P stands for price, the Q stands for quantity, and the E stands for the equilibrium, okay? Now you'll see there's an E1, S1, D1, Q1, P1, right? What does that mean? Well, when we're exploring the supply and demand model and we're gonna mess with it, we're gonna do things to it, we need to remember where we started. So those ones simply represent that's the starting point. We have to engage in ceteris paribus. All right, we consider all things equal, so we're going to start here. All right, when we're trying to determine what happens to supply and demand, and then as things occur, we're going to shift these curves. So we need to remember where we started. So that's why the ones are there. So you can start with zeros as well. I prefer ones, but if you want to go with zeros, that's fine too. But remember, when I ask you to draw it, this is what I want you to draw. All right, so like I said, ceteris paribus, other things equal. We want to make predictions about the market. Can't do that if we try to account for every variable. So we have to isolate certain variables in order to make predictions. So an example, let me give you a little example here. So I want you to solve this equation all at one time, just all at once. Just do it right now. Like don't substitute, don't do anything else. Just instantly in your mind, solve for every variable all at one time. Well, you can't do that. So you need to pick one variable. So you're going to pick 2y, right? You're going to pick y, right? And you're going to solve for y. And then once you do that, then you're going to plug in the solution. Then you're going to move on down the line. This is just an illustration that you need to pick one variable at a time to study. Then you look at the data. Then you can make predictions. All right, that's the end of part 1. This is a basic introduction. I will see you in part 2.